Thanks for that very kind introduction. Look, thank you for having me here and asking me to come to South Africa. It's my first time being here, and everyone told me, oh, Cape Town's just as pretty as Sydney. Actually, it's not. It's actually more beautiful than Sydney. So I've arrived yesterday, and just my drive here was just extraordinary. What do I intend to do today? What I'd like to do is talk to you about the hero's journey, and I'll explain that in just a second. What we might do, though, so that you have a clear understanding of who I am, I'll just, we can swap across to the iPad. Yep, there you go. So my background very quickly is I'm currently the executive chairman of a place called Waterloo Studios in Sydney, and we have Sydney Film School and Sydney Actors School. Sydney Film School was awarded one of the best film schools in the world, we're quite happy to say. This is where I get to brag about my team a little bit because they do it really well. I used to be the president of New York Film Academy's international division. It's the largest film school in the world. I had a wonderful time living in Abu Dhabi, and I used to travel to places all over the world and set up film schools. Prior to that, I was at Bond University. I was in Australia. I was it's the largest private university in Australia, and I was the director of film and television there. Prior to that, I actually worked in Hollywood, and I used to be a writer and worked for Columbia TriStar, Fox Family Channel, a whole NBC, a whole range of places, writing TV shows and movies, and I had a wonderful time. I never thought that this would ever happen to me, and there's only one reason why, and that's God's grace. I grew up in a town in Australia. I grew up in the United States for my first half in a working class town called Cleveland. The joke of Cleveland is, what's the first prize? A week's holiday in Cleveland. What's the second prize? 2 weeks holiday in Cleveland. Cleveland was a wonderful experience for me, and I grew up in the Star Wars generation. I went and saw Star Wars the first night it came out, and certainly changed my life. When I moved back to Australia, I grew up in the drug capital of Australia called Cabramatta, which was where the heroin trade in Sydney existed. It ran from that area. And if we've got time, I'll tell you about the next project I'm doing, which shows you just how God's grace is absolutely incredible. Never in a million years did I think I'd end up working in Hollywood. If anyone had told me at 14 you would be standing in Cape Town giving a lecture at this time, I wouldn't have believed it. I don't put it to myself. The only thing I do is give it to God. I've taken my hands off the wheel years ago, but what I do say is, and I do promise to God, I will deliver. No matter how many hours it takes, I will do what you ask me to do. So what I've moved into is I started in 2010 directing documentaries on Christianity, and those documentaries now play all over the world. Here's the irony. My ego said I needed to get to Fox, 20th Century Fox, Disney, because that's where everyone could see my work. The average show, like a Sopranos, has a viewership of 13 million people on its best night. I have documentaries now that play on Trinity Broadcasting Network. Their potential audience, 2 billion. And it's a Christian television network. In fact, when I lived in Abu Dhabi, I used to live across the road from the Sheikh Zayed Mosque, and my kids used to watch Trinity Broadcasting Network. So I asked, could I get my work seen by as many people as possible, thinking I needed to go to Disney. God said, sure, I'll do that for you, and put me on TBN. So that's kind of my background. Why I'm here is because I'm the director also of Sydney Film School. We're one of the best film schools in the world. We're very proud of it. Why? Because we teach people how to make films. Next week, all of you are going to become filmmakers. You might think, I don't have the resources, I don't have the ability, I don't have what it takes. Well, the first thing is this, you have to have a passion for it. You just demonstrated that passion. I can't work with people who go, nah, whatever. You guys are excited about it. The other thing you have is any phone. If it takes video and you can record sound, this, my friends, is the Gutenberg press. That changed the world. I was lucky enough in one of my documentaries to go and film the actual Gutenberg press over in Germany, I think it was. And And it made me realize that you all have the ability to reach other people simply through your phones. You have a distribution network. You don't need Disney. You have YouTube. You can get out to a range of people. Plus, I have partners such as Global Vision, which they need Christian short films to send across the world. And so what you're going to do next week is we're going to sit down and show you the fundamentals of making a really good-looking film where you bring exciting content, okay? Then what you'll do is hopefully, if you learn those skills, and I've done this all over the world, I'll tell you quickly, I was asked to go to Hanoi, and they got 15 churches in Hanoi. Now, Vietnam's a Marxist country. So I go to Hanoi, turn up, 15 churches send me 50 people, basically under 35, to make films. We have Friday night, Saturday, and Sunday. I'm doing the same thing with you guys. Friday night, I taught film grammar and how to shoot. Saturday, they got together in their groups and storyboarded. Saturday afternoon, they went out and shot, all Christians. Sunday, I'd never seen anything like it. We held it in a church. The service is on, and there's a row of chairs on the side with laptops. Everyone's editing the films and doing this at the same time. And Sunday night, we ended up having a film festival with 16 movies. That was in March. Then they asked me to come back again in September that year in Ho Chi Minh City. We had 150 students. And they, to this day, are still making films in Vietnam. So in some ways, I asked the next stage of life, I said to God, how do I help people tell their stories so that they can show people there is only one solution for their ills in this world, and that's Jesus. So, I don't have to really tell you much about this. Sydney Film School, Best Film School, we have Sydney Actors School, and we have Waterloo Studios. If you let me jump forward, because I'm limited for time, I'd like to start with some philosophy. And I'm sorry it's not better presented here. I'm usually very well organized. Okay, where are you? Here we go. I love philosophy. I've been studying it as an interest for years. And I want to start with this. 4,000 years ago, there was a philosopher called Socrates. And Socrates used to do an interesting thing. He would walk down in his toga into effectively the market of the day, and he'd walk up to somebody and say, "What do you think of love?" Do you have an answer? What do you think of love? It's beautiful. And then he'd say, "Always?" Okay. Then he'd walk up to somebody else and he'd say, the red cat, "What do you think of justice?" Good question. Right. And he'd thank you for those answers. He'd walk around asking these questions to different people, and his goal was simply to get to the truth as close as humanly possible. Now, the interesting thing is Socrates never wrote anything down. He had a student called Plato. Plato used to follow Socrates around and write down what Socrates would ask, and Plato started to write books, and Plato came up with a thing called the allegory of the cave. And the allegory of the cave is effectively a way of seeing the world as a story, if you like. Now, this is an image of Plato's allegory of the cave, and this has a purpose to it, and I think it'll be really cool when you see what it is. Plato believed when we're born into this world, we're like prisoners chained to poles in a dark cave looking at shadows on a wall. And because we're born into the world and told how the world works from these shadows, that effectively you believe that's reality. And what the philosopher does is they start asking questions. Is this real? Possibly. They look to the people next to you and they'll say, yeah, this is entirely real. This is the way the world is. But as they did what Socrates did, eventually they start to realize, hang on, this may not be the way life is supposed to be. And then eventually they turn around, and if you can see there's a thing, the road there. And what that person starts to realize is there's a fire at the back of the cave, and there's a road where people are walking along, and they have images of goats, cows, a whole range of things that are making the shadows on the wall that everyone thinks is reality. And as they continue to ask the questions, they finally, Plato said, ascend through the tunnel out into reality and become what we call enlightened. They see the sun, they see a real flower, and they're so excited, they run back in the cave and say to everyone else, I've seen it. This is all a fantasy. This is not real. And then they kill you. Why do I tell this story? Because despite the kill you bit, this is actually a cinema when you go to the movies. You pay X number of dollars to sit in a chair, to be a prisoner for 2 hours, to watch shadows on a wall projected behind you of people who have made up those images to make you feel a certain way. It gets worse in a cinema. We put music in to make sure you feel the way we want you to. It is the most manipulating thing you can actually do, and you can sell an idea. I had a revelation yesterday when I drove from the airport. Firstly, I saw the Spur sign and thought, wow, there's great ribs here. The second thing I saw were lots and lots of houses, quite small, made of wrought iron. And on every one of those houses, did I do something wrong? Oh, there we go. On top of all of those houses, do you know what I saw on almost every single one of them? The dish. Everybody's watching TV in those homes. What are they watching? What are they believing? What do they think is reality? Now you think about it. If any of you start to talk to somebody about how Jesus can change your life, and they're trapped to a pole looking at those things, those shadows on a wall, when I talk about killing you, it's not necessarily, although they did for Jesus, what it's actually about is you can be cancelled, you can be rejected, you can have a whole range of things that might hurt. But the fact of the matter is you don't know what seed you're going to plant. And over a period of time, they might get so disgruntled with the shadows they're watching that they might start to think of that seed that you planted, and they may start to ask those questions of maybe this isn't the way to live. Maybe there is another answer. So further to that, there's a thing called the hero's journey that I found when I was about 19. There was an academic called Joseph Campbell, and he studied mythology from all over the world, and he found that there were African myths and Chinese myths and Greco-Roman myths that when you laid them over each other, they told the same story. And that mythological story was a story of the hero. It was a story of the initiate who's orphaned, goes out into the world, learns how to become a warrior to either make the world worse or make the world a better place, and then ultimately change a society. In that journey, I would say you guys here are all studying to be warriors. Let me give you another example. Who here has never seen a Harry Potter film? Have all of you seen Harry Potter? Okay. There's controversy about what it is, but let me talk about it from a hero's journey perspective, and I'll also talk about Star Wars from a hero's journey perspective. It's this. It's a story of an orphan. I don't know if you realize Luke Skywalker is an orphan in Star Wars. Harry Potter is an orphan. Oh, by the way, James Bond is an orphan. Why do these stories, are they manipulated and created that way? I'm interested in cultural phenomenons. These stories are cultural phenomenons. There's certain reasons why, but I think it speaks to this. As an orphan, it's a psychological state. And what is that state? The orphan realizes the existential nature of being in the world alone. That sometimes your parents can't help you when you get to a certain age. What is that age? In Harry Potter, it's about 11. Luke Skywalker's about 15, 16, although it's played by a 32-year-old. That journey for that character then starts them on a journey into what we call the dark woods, into a place of the unknown, into a world they know nothing about. A number of you have come to Cape Town, I imagine, and when you first got here, like me, you made wrong turns. You went to places where you weren't quite sure where you got your food, where you did a whole range of things. That's the journey. And on that journey, you will meet other people who are going to inspire you, other people who, quite frankly, will stab you in the back. And the goal of this journey eventually is simply this. You will get to a point where the ego that you have, and I'll define ego here. The ego you have is how you want the world to see you. Not what you have to do for service. How do you want the world to see you? I have worked with a lot of Christians across the world, apologists, and I will frankly say some of them are the real deal and some of them are really putting on quite the show because it gives them celebrity. And the ego is about how you want to see the world to see you. What's the goal in the hero's journey? To break that ego down until it is completely gone. And you know what you do in the supreme ordeal? You give up. You hit bottom and you turn your life over to a goal greater than yourself. It is no longer about, I need to work for Disney. It is no longer about what are other people going to think of me. It is now about, in the hero's journey, how you are going to serve something greater than yourself to make the world a better place. You've seen Star Wars, I'm sure. In the fourth, call it the first in my book, where Luke gets pulled under in the water in the trash compactor. He is right in the belly of the beast. He gets pulled under and we think he is dead. If you watch that as an 8-year-old, you freak out because you've invested all of your emotions in Luke Skywalker. He's pulled under. You think he's dead. Now you're looking around going, as a young boy, Princess Leia, no, she's cool, but she's not a guy. I'm going to look over at the Wookiee. No, he's a walking dog. I'll be Han Solo. Han Solo's the guy I'll invest in. But Han doesn't have the spiritual journey that Luke has. Then finally, Luke comes shooting up out of the water. Now understand, this was a kid for the first half of the movie who wanted to go to Toshi Station to pick up some power converters. He plays with toys. From that moment on, now he swings across bridges, shoots TIE fighters, and he blows up the Death Star. What changed? He stopped trying to look like a rebel pilot and started to be one. And what happens in the hero's journey is that ego dies and it's reborn. Where is the ego, according to the hero's journey? The greatest thing you fear. Whatever is inside of you that you are terrified of is called the dragon. You do not want to go there. You do not want to face it. In Empire Strikes Back, Luke walks into the cave and Darth Vader appears. His greatest fear. And he cuts Darth Vader's head off and the mask blows open. You know what's under the mask? Luke's face. Why is that? Because he's terrified he will become his father. That's what he's most afraid of. But in the hero's journey, once you commit to that goal, then you start to pass tests. Now you're committed to something greater than yourself. Technically in the hero's journey, it's called Gnosticism. And they can call it Christianity, but effectively you become Christ is what it's teaching. I completely disagree. If you want to commit yourself to something greater and get rid of that fear, have Christ lead you. Don't become a Christ. It is a lie. It is something that is so attractive and it's more ego. If you give yourself to Christ and follow that journey, and so I ask you today, what is it that you really fear? Is it talking to somebody else about Christianity? Is it actually opening up about your own vulnerabilities and your stories? Because the one thing that you can do is if you tell your story, and we know this from film, we know it from books, if you tell your story, you inspire somebody else to think about theirs, and then ultimately that's the opening for change. That's something that can happen. What happens at the end of this hero's journey? Well, in Star Wars, Luke comes back and he gets a big medal. Stands up and everyone applauds him. Isn't it ironic? He wanted to be celebrated as a rebel pilot, and it wasn't until he gave it all away that he gets celebrated. But you know what? It doesn't matter then. By that point, he's now given his life over to something greater than himself. So I'm here today really to tell you that story because I'm hoping next week when you start making movies, you understand something, and it's this. I can teach you wide shot, mid shot, close up, how to make it look good, all those kind of elements. What I can't teach you next week is how honest you're going to be. If you want to do this and do it really well, be authentic, be honest about the stories you want to tell. And there's a lot of courage that takes. And that's why I love the hero's journey, because it actually teaches you, if you're going to do this, have courage. Go out there and don't hold back. Don't hold off on your stories. I'll teach you how to make them look good. Are we okay? No, it's okay. I don't need it. No, I'm fine. Thank you. Don't hold back on your stories. I'll teach you how to make it look good. I'll teach you how to put the narrative together. But what I need you to do is start to think about, if I sat you down for 3 minutes and asked you a story about your life, what kind of story would you tell? What kind of thing would you say that I hope would be an inspiration to others? Now, why am I doing this? Because here's what happens on this Gutenberg press in my pocket. You go back, I imagine most of you are going to go back, or some of you are going back to your homes, your towns, those places. You might go and work with other churches. You can tell those stories within the walls of the church and you'll inspire the church. If you can record those stories and you can put them out to the world, you have no idea whose lives you're going to change. Now, I can tell you just a quick story. I made a series called Jesus the Game Changer, which we traveled all over the world to make. I interviewed about 45 Christian apologists, some of the best in the world, Os Guinness, John Lennox, who I called Richard Dawkins by mistake. And I interviewed all these people. That series played all over the world on TBN, as I talked about. But here's what really blew me away and how God works. In my home group, our Bible study, there's probably about 8 of us. All of a sudden, from the person who organises the Bible study, they say, we've got 2 new women who are joining next Friday night in our Bible study. Great, awesome. They've just come recently to the church. They're not Christians. They weren't Christians. So the women turn up at the Bible study, all saying hello, hi, I'm Simon and everything. And so we start talking. We said to them, why did you guys come to church? And the woman said, we saw this series called Jesus the Game Changer. And it blew me away. To this day, they don't know that I made it. We sat in there and they were talking about what it is. Now, I'm not going to say it was because of me. I never will. But the situation was, I did what God asked me to do, and some of that was pretty hard work, traveling a lot, in some cases 2 countries in one day, because we had a very small crew. It was me directing and my camera person doing sound as well. When you look at the series, it looks like we had a crew of 20, and we traveled all over and did it. And the thing was, I still to this day don't know how many people that's touched, but I know for 2 women, one of them, she was just recovered from cancer, and it gave her hope. And one of the stories that I believe gave her hope was a Sudanese woman who was walking out of her home during the war we interviewed, and that woman said, when people ask her, how do you believe in a God when you saw so much suffering? And her answer, if I didn't have God then, I wouldn't be here today. 2 other women from Iran who we interviewed. They were put in an Iranian prison for 9 months. Their crime, and the Iranian prison had dirt floors. They were told every Monday that on Friday they were going to be executed. What was their crime? They delivered 10,000 Bibles in Iran. The only reason they got out was because of a journalist who got hold of the story, put it out there and got it to the Vatican, and the Pope made it really public, and then the Iranian government finally said, we'll release you. They now live in Washington, D.C., and they're studying Bible studies. I've had the pleasure of meeting these people, but the one thing is this. If you're sitting here today, you might think, you might think that anything you do may not have an effect. Even on a really badly made video, you have no idea the power of what media does. It is upstream from politics. People think that politics makes culture. I know it doesn't. Media makes culture, and politicians respond to it. The power that you have to actually spread the word, and if you truly believe that Christianity is a beautiful, beautiful way of living, that solves people's, gives them hope, then hopefully when I teach you next week about how to make a film, what you put into it, I can't teach you. What you bring to it is so special and unique. And why I'm so excited to work with you, because I have no idea the kind of stories that you're going to share. And truly, I can't wait to do that. So thanks again for having me here today. Hopefully I've shed some light on what we'll be doing next week. And it's also going to be a lot of fun. You guys will have a great time. So thank you.